Hello again, Internet. Welcome back once more to Curse You Jordan. This is part number 2 of my countdown of my top 30 favorite games of all time. The last video went a little bit longer than I intended to. I'm going to try to cut this down as quickly as I can. I don't really have a script for any of this. I'm just really kind of talking about these games off of the cuff. And I do have a tendency to be somewhat more on the verbose side. So I'm going to really do the best I can at being as brief and terse about this as I can, so we can get through the rest of the list. So on that note, let's just get on with the next 10. Number 20, Journey. My god, what a beautiful game. I mean, I know the whole video games as art argument has been settled a long time ago. Nobody is really talking about that as though it's like a provocative thing anymore. But just in case anybody still wasn't convinced of that, this game will make you a believer. I mean, it's the closest thing I've ever seen to an interactive painting, practically. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Make no bones about it, that's by no means the only reason to play this game. It's so simple in concept and in execution, but something about the cohesive experience from beginning to end. I mean, once you even just put aside the visuals, it is beautiful at its heart. I mean, it's really just such a clever idea and is executed even more brilliantly. I particularly appreciate not only the story, but how it's told. Again, very simplistically, and is told entirely without text, without voice or exposition. It's an entirely visual, if I could put it this way, a pictorial experience. All the elements of the story kind of have to be put together by you, the player. It's not to say necessarily that it's difficult to understand, but it is sort of obscure, and you have to make sense of it. This also leaves it wildly open to interpretation, and I've read some very interesting ones. I think at its core, it's also extremely philosophical in a lot of ways that I'm not going to waste time getting into right now. But trust me on this one, at only about 2 hours playtime, you're going to want to check this one out. It requires very little investment on your part, and you're not going to look back on the experience as feeling like it was a waste. Number 19, Comic Zone. I'm going to make the case right now, best game on the console. And maybe, I mean, I could get into this argument, I could look at different games and kind of go back and forth on it, but just right now, in the spur of the moment, I'm going to say, quite possibly the hardest game I've ever played. But man, is it ever rewarding. I don't want to say that it's the closest thing ever to an interactive comic book, because there are literal interactive comic books. But in terms of a comic being gamified, this is the absolute king of the castle, undisputed. Everything about this not only rocks, but just screams Genesis. All of the characters, and the insane storyline, and of course those great classic Genesis sound effects and the amazing score, which some of you may have noticed I actually borrow for this channel from time to time, including on this very video series. And like all the great combat moves and maneuvers and all the crazy combos that you can pull off and stuff like that, and all the special items and pickups and stuff like that that help you on your journey. All of it is just so much fun. And then one of my personal most favorite parts about this game is that because you're literally making your way through an actual comic page, you can actually pick branching paths. If you decide you don't want to read the page chronologically the way that a person would actually read left to right, top to bottom, you can branch off in different directions and just kind of zip all over the page. This game is tough as nails, so I couldn't fault you if you've tried it and just haven't been able to get very far, got frustrated and put it down. But you owe it to yourself to at least give it a shot. Plus, if you're like me and got this when you were a kid, it came with Ooh, Special American Recording CD Sampler. Man, I listened to the shit out of the CD when I was a kid. In fact, I think this might even have been technically the second CD that I owned. And I mean, how can you go wrong with artists like MC 900 Foot Jesus, or Julian Cope, or Lindsay? But before Lindsay got really big. All joking aside, though, I actually really kind of do love that CD. But the game is awesome. Play it. Number 18, Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons. Man, what an experience. I don't want to say that it's the darkest game I've ever played, but it comes off feeling like it when you consider how cute and innocent it seems on the surface. Man, it really takes a left turn on you. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to suggest that this somehow isn't suitable for kids to play or anything like that, but some of the themes do get pretty grown up. Of course, the gameplay element of it itself is just absolutely brilliant. It takes what is, in essence, a co-op experience and forces it into a solo player experience. So you are actually taking control of both brothers simultaneously with each stick. Not only is it a lot of fun, but it really stretches your brain and makes you think in a way you're not accustomed to in most other games. You really, I have to say, put a lot of brain power, a lot of thought, really concentrating into managing both sticks independently of each other and trying to keep track of the two brothers, where they're going and what they're doing simultaneously, and trying to get them to work together. It's kind of a trip. And of course, graphically, I mean, obviously, there are infinitely more realistic looking games, but very few that I would say as stunningly gorgeous. The world it paints is jaw-dropping. And also, as was the case with Journey, the story very interestingly told all through pantomime. They do speak, but it's kind of like this Sigaros-esque made-up language that doesn't actually mean anything. And yet, interestingly, you can still tell basically what they're saying and what's going on. And also, as was the case with Journey, from beginning to end, this is a relatively short experience, so you have no excuse to not try it. And, oh man, I'm just looking at the cover now. GameTrailers.com, 2013 Game of the Year. Oh, sweet Game Trailers. God, that makes me sad now. A lot like this game, as a matter of fact. And also, as was the case with Journey, there's a lot of underlying philosophical themes that it examines. Again, really interestingly, all through visuals and the action and the events that take place. No, discernible dialogue and no text, no, long-winded exposition, just purely through the gameplay itself. Number 17, Star Wars Rogue Squadron. There are, untold amount of Star Wars games out there. A lot of them that I've played and enjoyed. A couple that I even toyed with also putting on this list. In the end, I really had to settle on this one being ultimately my favorite Star Wars game. That's, again, as was the nature with this entire list, I'm not necessarily trying to say I think this is the best Star Wars game, but it is my personal favorite. It's the one I have the most fun with. It's the one that I come back to again and again and again. I never get sick of it. And even though it's, there's been other games in the Rogue Squadron series, let alone all of the other Star Wars games that are flight simulators, in a lot of ways, this one kind of did it the best. And even if you don't necessarily agree with that, I think I could at the very least say that it did it the most impressively, purely because of the technology at the time. I had never seen anything like this, especially not on a home console. And of course, even though there are plenty of games out there that are compatible with the expansion pack, this is one of the few ones at the time that really kind of screamed it at you. Guys, seriously, you're gonna want the expansion pack for this experience. And it really pays off. But beyond that, there's not really much to say that isn't totally obvious. If you're a Star Wars fan, this game is everything that you would be dreaming of. Everything that you could fantasize about as a kid. Flying an X-Wing around, and a Y-Wing, an A-Wing, even later on if you can unlock it, the Millennium Falcon, and there's even a hidden TIE Interceptor, all kinds of great ships, all the power-ups, the levels are great, all of the individual missions that you have to go on are really cleverly thought out. And I know it's maybe a little bit cliche to word it this way, but you really do feel like Luke Skywalker in his cockpit. Like you're genuinely fighting for the Rebel Alliance, and you really do feel that struggle. And I mean, as far as air-based combat goes, you'd be hard-pressed to do better. And I know a lot of people complain endlessly about the N64 controller, but man, it just feels so right for this game. Number 16, Starcraft. Oh boy, this is a good one. And anybody who doesn't think so, I know about a bajillion South Koreans who disagree. I don't think it's an exaggeration to call this game the mother of all real-time strategy games. To even mention the genre at all, this is the first game that pops into your mind. The storyline is crazy phenomenal. The gameplay is not only super fun, but nearly indescribably complex, and yet that just makes how well balanced the experience is all that much more impressive. You got like 3 different races to choose from, and there's a million different units and buildings inside each of them, each with their own unique abilities and all the different tech trees and everything. You probably don't need me to sell you on this because it's one of the most beloved video games worldwide, so I don't really know what there is to say about it that isn't stating the obvious. Also, pro tip, if you happen to be one of the 2 people left on planet Earth that still hasn't played this game, word to the wise, it's now free to play, so you have no excuse. You don't even have the excuse of saying that your computer isn't good enough to handle it, because this happens to be the 20-year anniversary of this game. So even if your computer legit actually is 20 years old, it should still run it fine. And no matter how many times I play this game through from beginning to end, it never gets tiring. The experience is always fresh. There's always something new to learn. It is infinitely complex. It's like chess. You can't ever get too good at it. You can't ever stop learning new things. Number 15, Ghost of Sparta. Not that there haven't been a lot of other mobile games that I've enjoyed in the past, but I have to be honest and upfront, I've just never been much of a handheld guy. I've always preferred sitting down in front of my TV with the console plugged in. But then, that just goes to show how awesome this game really has to be for me to consider it this highly. I mean, I'm putting it in front of Starcraft, for crying out loud. I have to acknowledge this is a personal bias, that I am just that much of a God of War fan. With that being said, I was actually really surprised with how I considered this to be better than some of the other titles in the franchise. Even the first one on PS2. For starters, graphically, this game is unbelievable for a PSP game. In fact, when you first play it, it becomes immediately obvious that it is the best looking game on the platform, bar none. Of course, it came as little surprise to me when I found out later that this game was originally intended to be on the PS2, and boy does it show. This game does stuff graphically that even the first two original PS2 games didn't do. The storyline is really interesting too, because even though it's not the first game in the franchise to go back in time, this is the first one to fill a gap between two games. Basically, I would just summarize the long and short of it as being that it does everything that the original God of War did, but better. Everything from the graphics, to the combat, to the level design, to even the storyline is just, in my personal opinion, superior. The only downside to it is that you are playing it on a mobile platform. What I really recommend you do is pick up the God of War Origins disc on PS3. Man, playing this game with a DualShock 3 feels so great, especially being able to actually roll using the right stick like you can in the other games. If you're a fan of the God of War franchise, I highly recommend this one. If you're a PSP fan, this is a must-own as far as I'm concerned. Number 14, Super Mario Bros. 3. Woo boy, we are getting pretty damn close when we are talking about the king of all platformers. If this one doesn't take it, it's pretty darn close. This is certainly one of the best Mario games of all time. Many people consider it to be the best. Kind of like with Starcraft, there's very little that needs to be said about this game. This game's reputation precedes itself, everybody knows it, everybody's played it, everybody knows how awesome it is. Everything about it is awesome. Everything about its predecessors is improved upon. There's a lot of people who would certainly say Super Mario World is the best of the 2D Marios, but given that I, as I mentioned before, was a Genesis kid growing up, this was always the ultimate platformer for me. All the different worlds, all of the crazy insane power-ups. The adventure really felt, well, actually just like that, like an adventure. The other games kinda not so much, up until that point. Even to this day, this game is just an absolute joy to play. It's hard to put it down. And is that or is that not like the most iconic video game cover of all time? Number 13, Startropics. This one may be a little bit less accessible than Mario 3, and I can also totally see why it wouldn't be for everybody. Well, I mean, for starters, it's certainly no platformer. It's actually a lot closer to a game like Zelda. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, this was originally conceptualized as being sort of a sister game to Zelda, even though it has absolutely no relation to that franchise at all. And of course, it was developed by Nintendo, so they would know. Which actually, in retrospect, makes me really sad to think about how this franchise has been totally abandoned since then. There's only been a second game that was ever released, and then just nothing for it after that. In fact, I think Startropics 2 might have been either the last or the second last game ever released on the NES. This game, however, does things a little bit differently than the original Legend of Zelda, and I think it's unfair to compare it so directly because it's not trying to be Zelda, it's trying to do its own thing. With The Legend of Zelda, everything felt very fluid and free, like you could just kind of go anywhere. Whereas with this game, it's got this interesting mechanic where everything is sort of based around a grid. Sometimes it's literally a visible grid where you're jumping on top of blocks and going from one block or one platform to another. Other times it's not visible, but you can feel it in how you move. It feels a little bit strange at first, but you do get used to it, and it plays directly into how the game is designed and intended to be played. I don't know if this is blasphemy or not, but even though there was a lot about the original Legend of Zelda that really was truly brilliant, I kind of feel a little bit sour about the overall experience. I actually would make a case that this game is superior. I know that's just me, I know that's an unpopular opinion, but if being faced with both of those games, I would pick this one any day. The story for an NES title is really engaging and super funny. It's got this really silly, goofball, childish sort of sense of humor about it that just always makes me laugh. And because I plan on doing a video series on this game at some point in the future, I don't want to get too much into it right now, but I'd be remiss if I didn't at least bring up the infamous letter that the original game cartridge came with. Oh, it was one of the most brilliant Easter eggs in any game that I've ever encountered. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. It'll blow your mind. Also, tough as nails. Probably not as hard as Comic Zone, but it gives it a run for its money. Still, so much fun to play. Number 12. Super Mario Brothers. This is the game. In my mind's eye, I always picture this game whenever somebody just says video game. It is the quintessential video game, in my personal opinion. It's a game everybody knows, everybody's played, everybody's loved. In fact, I could be wrong about this. Memories are old and fickle, but this may well have actually been the first video game I ever played. Boy, it was a real tough decision trying to decide whether I was going to put this or Mario 3 higher on the list. I think one could make a very strong case for Mario 3 being objectively a superior game in every way. Yet, at the end of the day, I just like this game just a little bit more. It's, I have to say it, purely a personal bias thing. I don't really have a strong argument for why it's better than Mario 3. I can only say that there's something about it that strikes a chord with me more. It's very likely a totally uniquely personal thing, although at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of other people had the same feelings about it. This game defined an entire genre of games, is to this day synonymous with platformers for an entire generation of gamers that grew up with it, and arguably is single-handedly responsible for resurrecting the entire video game industry. This game is truly a masterpiece of the format. Every pixel in it is masterfully crafted. There is almost zero chance whatsoever that you have not played this game, so I'm not really going to waste any more time talking about it because you already know for yourself just how incredible and important this game is.
By defeating
and number 11, God of War 2. Take basically everything that I've already said about the prior two God of War games that I've had on this list and just multiply it by 10. God of War and God of War Ghost of Sparta, while still managing to make my top 30 list, I would say still have got nothing on this game. This kicks it up a notch and then some. Absolutely every element of it, whether it's the gameplay, the graphics, the storyline, everything is in a class all its own. And of course, it's yet another obvious statement to make that this is purely a subjective thing. It depends a lot on what your particular taste in video game genres are, but I think you could make a good case for this being one of the absolute best PS2 games ever. In fact, this particular edition comes with a bonus DVD disc, and if you watch the bonus features on it, it really makes you appreciate just how hard they had to squeeze every drop of processing power out of that console. Even though the original God of War still is a favorite of mine, this one makes it look like a piece of garbage by comparison. And that about wraps it up for this video. I could no doubt talk about all of the games on this list for an eternity, but once again, in the spirit of trying to speed things along a little bit more in this video, I think I'm just going to end it here. So, I hope you enjoyed this second part of my Top 30 series. Stay tuned next week when you will finally get the final third installment and learn my top 10 games. This is where it starts to get real good, so make sure not to miss it. It really takes a right turn. a right turn. That's not the expression, it's left turn. Sorry, I'm dyslexic.